When a struggling single father stopped to help a crying pregnant woman at a gas station, he had no idea she was a millionaire CEO whose empire had just crumbled in a single day. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Welcome to tonight's story. Stick with me until the end and comment with your city so I can see how far this incredible tale has traveled around the world. The rain hammered against the cracked asphalt of the Texaco station, like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller fragments that caught the sickly yellow glow of the overhead lights. Michael Carter pulled his battered Honda Civic up to pump number 3, the engine coughing once before falling silent, with what sounded almost like relief. He sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the digital numbers on the gas pump blur through his rain-streaked windshield. $57.38. That's what remained in his checking account after paying rent, utilities, and buying groceries for the week. The surgery for Ethan, his 8-year-old son who needed heart surgery, that insurance would only partially cover, seemed as distant as the moon. Michael closed his eyes and let his forehead rest against the steering wheel, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones like sediment. He'd just finished his second shift of the day, 12 hours of manual labor at the construction site, followed by 6 hours stocking shelves at the all-night grocery store. His hands were raw, his back ached, and tomorrow he'd do it all over again. But that was the price of being a single father in a world that didn't seem to care about single fathers. The rain showed no signs of letting up as Michael forced himself out of the car, pulling his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. The cold bit through the worn fabric, immediately sending shivers down his spine. He fumbled with his wallet, counting the crumpled bills twice before sliding his debit card into the pump. Please work, he thought. Please just work this one time. The machine beeped its approval, and Michael felt a small surge of relief. He began filling the tank, watching the numbers climb with the same anxiety most people reserved for medical diagnoses. Each gallon was another mile he could drive to work, another day he could keep pushing forward for Ethan. That's when he saw her. Across the station, under the harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look like a crime scene, a young woman sat on the curb beside a gleaming black Mercedes. Her head was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that were audible even over the drumming rain. She looked completely out of place, expensive clothes, perfect hair, despite the weather-manicured nails that caught the light as she wiped her eyes. Michael's first instinct was to mind his own business. He had enough problems without taking on someone else's. But there was something about the way she sat there, so utterly alone and broken, that reminded him of himself on the worst nights. The nights when Ethan was asleep, and Michael would sit in his car outside their apartment, wondering how he was going to make it through another month. The gas pump clicked off, jolting him back to the present. 23.50. Not even half a tank, but it would have to do. Michael replaced the nozzle and screwed the gas cap back on his eyes, drifting back to the woman. She hadn't moved, hadn't even looked up. Rain was beginning to soak through her white blouse, and he could see that she was pregnant, maybe 6 months along. Something inside his chest twisted. Maybe it was the father in him, or maybe it was just basic human decency, but Michael found himself walking across the wet pavement toward her before he'd consciously made the decision to move. "Excuse me," he called out softly, when he was still a few feet away, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" The woman's head snapped up, revealing a face that was stunning, even streaked with tears and mascara. Her eyes were deep blue, the kind that seemed to hold secrets, and they widened in surprise as she took in his appearance. Michael suddenly became aware of how he must look dirty. Work clothes, unshaven face, exhaustion, written in every line of his features. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't mean to. I should go." She started to stand, swaying slightly on her feet. "Hey, whoa," Michael said instinctively, reaching out to steady her. "You don't have to go anywhere. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. It's pretty late to be out here alone, especially in this weather." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he could be trusted. Michael kept his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. He'd learned over the years that sometimes people just needed someone to see them, to acknowledge their pain without trying to fix it. "I'm Isabella," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Michael," he replied with a small nod. "Do you want to get out of the rain? There's a diner across the street that stays open all night." Isabella glanced at the Mercedes, then back at Michael. Something in his eyes, maybe it was the genuine concern, or the way he looked at her like a person rather than an object, made her decision for her. "Okay," she whispered. They ran across the street together, splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs of the diner. Michael held the door open for her, and they slipped inside, both of them dripping onto the checkered linoleum floor. The warmth hit them immediately, along with the smell of coffee and bacon grease. The diner was nearly empty, except for a trucker, hunched over a cup of coffee at the counter, and a waitress who looked like she'd seen everything life had to offer twice. She gestured toward a booth in the corner, without looking up from her magazine. They slid into opposite sides of the booth, and Michael couldn't help but notice how Isabella's hands trembled as she wrapped them around the cup of coffee the waitress brought over. He ordered black coffee for himself and waited, sensing that she needed time to find her words. "You must think I'm crazy," Isabella said, finally staring down into her cup. "Sitting out there in the rain like some kind of lunatic." "Everyone has bad days," Michael replied simply. "Some are just worse than others." Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Bad day. That's one way to put it." She looked up at him. Really looked at him, taking in the calluses on his hands, the tiredness in his eyes, the way his clothes hung on his frame like he'd lost weight recently. "What about you? What brings you to a gas station at midnight on a Tuesday?" Michael hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about his life with strangers, wasn't used to talking about it with anyone, really. But something about Isabella, maybe it was the way she'd asked the question, without judgment, or maybe it was the recognition he saw in her eyes, made him want to be honest. "Work," he said. "2 jobs, actually. Construction during the day, grocery store at night. My son needs surgery and insurance doesn't cover everything." "How old is he?" 8. His name's Ethan. Michael's voice softened when he said his son's name the way it always did. "He's got a heart condition. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but if we don't fix it soon..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Isabella was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "That must be terrifying." "It is," Michael admitted. "But you do what you have to do, you know. He's my whole world." Something in Isabella's expression shifted, a crack appearing in the carefully constructed walls she'd built around herself. "You're a good father," she said quietly. "I try to be. Most days I feel like I'm failing." "Join the club," Isabella muttered, one hand moving unconsciously to her belly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain against the windows and the low murmur of the television in the corner. Finally, Isabella took a deep breath and began to speak. "This morning I woke up as the CEO of a company I built from nothing," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that had started flowing again. "I had a fiancé I trusted, a business partner I respected, and a future that seemed bright and secure. Tonight, I have none of those things." Michael leaned forward slightly, encouraging her to continue without saying a word. "His name was David Morrison. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months. He was supposed to be my partner in everything business and personal. I trusted him with my company, my heart, my future. Isabella's voice cracked on the last word. What happened? I found out he's been embezzling from the company for over a year. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Money that should have gone to employee salaries, to expansion, to research and development. Money that I worked 18-hour days to earn. Isabella's hands clenched into fists around her coffee cup. But that's not even the worst part. Michael waited, sensing there was more. He's been sleeping with my assistant. My friend, or at least someone I thought was my friend. They've been planning this together, systematically draining my company while making me look incompetent to the board of directors. They were going to push me out, take over everything I built, and leave me with nothing. Jesus, Michael breathed. How did you find out? Accidentally. I came back to the office tonight to pick up some files and saw them together in my conference room. They were laughing, Michael. Laughing about how easy it had been to fool me, how stupid I was to trust them. David was showing her bank statements, talking about how they'd be set for life once they got rid of me completely. Isabella's voice broke completely then, and she buried her face in her hands. I'm 6 months pregnant with his child, and he was ready to destroy everything I've worked for. Everything I am. Michael felt a surge of anger so intense it surprised him. He'd never met this woman before tonight, but the injustice of what had been done to her made his blood boil. What did you do? I ran. Isabella admitted, shame coloring her voice. I just ran. Got in my car and drove until I ended up at that gas station. I don't even know where I am. You're in Millbrook, Michael said gently. About 40 miles outside the city. Isabella nodded absently, still lost in her pain. I don't know what to do now. The board meets tomorrow morning, this morning, I guess. David will spin some story about me being unstable, point to my pregnancy as evidence that I'm not fit to run the company anymore. He's probably already planted seeds of doubt about my competence. By noon, I'll be voted out of my own company. Not if you fight back. Isabella looked up, surprised by the steel in Michael's voice. I mean it, he continued. You said you saw them together, heard them talking about what they'd done. That's evidence. You can't let them win just because they hurt you. It's not that simple, Isabella protested. David is charming, convincing. He knows how to manipulate people, how to make them see things his way. I'm just the emotional pregnant woman who can't handle the pressure. No, Michael said firmly. You're the CEO who built a company from nothing. You're the person who had the vision and the strength to create something meaningful. Don't let them rewrite your story. Isabella stared at him, seeing something in his eyes that she hadn't expected belief. Not pity, not condescension, but genuine belief in her ability to overcome this. Why do you care? She asked. You don't even know me. Michael was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. Because I know what it's like to feel helpless, he said finally. I know what it's like to have the whole world stacked against you and feel like giving up is the only option. But I also know that sometimes when you think you have nothing left, that's when you find out what you're really made of. What if I'm not made of anything strong enough? Then your child will grow up knowing their mother gave up without a fight. Is that the story you want them to inherit? The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, but she recognized the truth in them. She thought about the life growing inside her, about the legacy she wanted to leave. Did she want her child to remember her as the woman who built an empire, or the woman who let others tear it down? I wouldn't even know where to start, she said. But there was something different in her voice now, a spark of the fire that had built her company in the first place. Start with what you know, Michael said. You saw them together, heard them talking. That's your foundation. Build from there. Isabella pulled her phone from her purse and stared at it for a long moment. The screen showed 17 missed calls from David, 8 from her assistant Sarah, and dozens of text messages she hadn't bothered to read. I could call my lawyer, she said slowly. James Rodriguez. He handled the incorporation of my company, drew up all the partnership agreements. If anyone would know how to navigate this, it would be him. It's past midnight, Michael pointed out. James sleeps with his phone next to his bed. Legal emergencies don't follow business hours. Isabella's fingers hovered over the phone. But what if he doesn't believe me? What if David has already gotten to him? Then you find another lawyer, and another one after that if necessary. You don't stop until you find someone who will listen. Isabella looked at Michael with something approaching awe. How are you so sure about this, about fighting back when everything seems impossible? Michael thought about Ethan, about the nights he'd sat in hospital waiting rooms while doctors ran test after test, about the mountain of medical bills that grew taller every month, about the way his son smiled despite everything and trusted that his father would find a way to make things right. Because the alternative is unacceptable, he said simply. Isabella nodded slowly, understanding, passing between them like an electric current. She dialed James Rodriguez's number and held her breath as it rang. Isabella. James's voice was groggy but alert. What's wrong? It's almost 1 a.m. James, I need your help. Something's happened. Something bad. David has been embezzling from the company, and I think he's planning to have me removed from the board. There was a pause, then the sound of James sitting up in bed. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm at a diner outside the city. And yes, I'm safe. There's someone here who helped me realize I need to fight this. Don't say anything else over the phone. Can you get to my office in an hour? Yes. Do it. Bring any evidence you have, any documentation, anything that might be relevant. We're going to war, Isabella, and I want to be prepared. Isabella hung up and looked at Michael with eyes that had regained some of their original fire. He believes me. Of course he does. You're telling the truth. Will you? Isabella hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. Would you come with me to his office, I mean? I know it's a lot to ask, and you probably need to get home to your son, but Ethan's at my neighbor's house, Michael said, checking his watch. She watches him when I work nights. I don't have to pick him up until 7. So you'll come. Michael looked at this woman who had somehow become important to him in the space of an hour, this stranger who reminded him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Yeah, he said, I'll come. They drove into the city in Isabella's Mercedes, Michael feeling oddly out of place in the leather seats but strangely comfortable in Isabella's presence. She'd stopped crying, and he could see the wheels turning in her mind as she planned her next moves. Tell me about your son, she said, as they navigated the empty highways. Ethan. Michael's face lit up despite his exhaustion. He's incredible. Smarter than me, braver than me, funnier than me. He loves baseball even though he can't play right now because of his heart. Wants to be a doctor when he grows up so he can help other kids like him. He sounds amazing. He is. He's the reason I get up every morning, the reason I work 2 jobs, the reason I keep pushing, even when everything feels impossible. Isabella was quiet for a moment. I used to think my company was my child, that building it and growing it was the most important thing I could do with my life. But now, she placed a hand on her belly. Now I'm going to have an actual child, and I realize I've been fighting for the wrong things. You haven't been fighting for the wrong things, Michael said. You've been building something meaningful, creating jobs, providing value. That's not nothing. But now you're fighting for something even more important, your child's future. How do you do it? Isabella asked. How do you balance being a parent with everything else? Badly, most of the time, Michael admitted with a rueful laugh. But love covers a multitude of sins. When you love someone the way you love your child, you find strength you never knew you had. They pulled into the parking garage of a sleek downtown office building, and Isabella felt her determination solidify like concrete. She was going to fight for her company, for her future, for her child's inheritance. And somehow, having Michael beside her made it feel possible. James Rodriguez was waiting for them in his office, a man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was all dark wood and leather, the kind of place where important decisions were made and battles were won. Isabella, he said, embracing her briefly, before turning to Michael with a questioning look. This is Michael Carter, Isabella said. He's a friend, someone who helped me realize I couldn't just give up. James shook Michael's hand, taking in his work clothes and tired eyes without judgment. Any friend of Isabella's is welcome here. Now tell me everything. For the next 2 hours, Isabella laid out the details of David's betrayal while James took notes and asked pointed questions. Michael sat quietly in the corner, offering silent support and occasional insights that surprised both lawyers with their clarity. This is bad, James said, finally setting down his pen. But it's not insurmountable. The key is moving fast. If David thinks you're in hiding, licking your wounds, he'll get overconfident. We can use that against him. What do you need me to do? Isabella asked. First, we need to document everything you overheard. Then we need to get into your office and gather evidence before he has a chance to destroy it. Finally, we need to present a united front to the board before he can spin his narrative. The board meets at 10, Isabella said. That's only 7 hours from now. Then we'd better get started, James replied grimly. As they prepared to leave for Isabella's office, Michael stood up. I should go. You don't need me for this part, and I need to get Ethan ready for school. Isabella turned to him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. In the space of a few hours, this stranger had become something she couldn't quite name, anchor, advocate, reminder of her own strength. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything, for seeing me, for believing in me, for not letting me give up. You didn't need me to be strong, Michael replied. You just needed someone to remind you that you already were. He started toward the door, then turned back. Isabella, whatever happens today, remember that your child is going to be proud to call you mother. Not because of your company or your money, but because of who you are when everything falls apart. And then he was gone, leaving Isabella staring at the empty doorway, with tears in her eyes and steel in her spine. The battle for her company and her future was about to begin. The fluorescent lights of Meridian Technologies hummed overhead as Isabella's heels clicked against the marble floor of the lobby. It was 4:30 a.m., and the building was eerily quiet, except for the soft whoosh of the ventilation system and the distant rumble of early morning traffic. James Rodriguez walked beside her, his briefcase in one hand and a digital recorder in the other, while behind them followed Marcus Chen, a forensic accountant James had called in as backup. Security cameras, James asked quietly as they approached the elevator bank. Disabled in the executive offices, Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands as she swiped her access card. David insisted on it last month, said it was about executive privacy and sensitive conversations. I should have known. The elevator rose silently to the 15th floor, and Isabella felt her stomach clench with each passing level. This building had been her second home for the past 5 years. the physical manifestation of every dream she'd ever had about building something meaningful. Now it felt like a mausoleum, holding the corpse of everything she'd believed about trust and partnership. "Remember," James said as the elevator dinged softly, "we're here to gather evidence, not to confront anyone. If David or Sarah are here, we document and retreat. The board meeting is in 5.5 hours, and we need to be prepared." The executive floor was dark except for the emergency lighting along the corridors. Isabella's corner office sat at the far end past David's office and the conference room where her world had shattered just hours earlier. As they walked, she pointed out the various offices to James and Marcus, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's David's office there. Sarah's desk is just outside it. She's his assistant as well as mine. The conference room where I saw them is—" Isabella stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth. Light was spilling from under David's office door. "He's here!" she breathed, terror and fury warring in her chest. James grabbed her arm gently. "We stick to the plan. Your office first, gather what we need, then we leave. If he sees us, let me do the talking." They crept past David's office, and Isabella could hear the low murmur of voices from within. Her own office was mercifully dark and empty, and she quickly disabled the alarm with shaking fingers. "What are we looking for?" Marcus asked, pulling on latex gloves and opening his laptop. "Financial records board communications, anything that shows unusual transactions or decisions made without my knowledge," Isabella said, moving to her desk and beginning to sort through files. "David had access to all our accounts, but I kept backup records of everything." For the next hour, they worked in careful silence, Isabella pulling files while Marcus connected to her computer and began copying hard drives. James photographed documents and took detailed notes, building what he called their war chest for the morning's confrontation. "Isabella," Marcus said suddenly, his voice tight with excitement, "look at this." She moved to his side, staring at her computer screen where he'd pulled up a series of bank transfers. "What am I seeing?" "Systematic withdrawals over the past 14 months. Small amounts at first, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, but escalating significantly in the past 6 months. The money's being funneled through 3 different shell companies before ending up in an account in the Cayman Islands." "How much total?" Isabella asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Marcus's fingers flew over the keyboard, running calculations. "Jesus, nearly $800,000. The number hit Isabella like a physical blow. $800,000 money that should have gone to employee bonuses, to the expansion into European markets they'd been planning, to the research and development that kept them competitive. "There's more," Marcus continued grimly. "He's been manipulating your quarterly reports to the board, making it look like the company is underperforming, when actually you've been exceeding projections by significant margins." "What does that mean?" Isabella asked, though she was beginning to understand. "It means he's been setting you up for this for over a year," James said, his voice cold with anger. "Making you look incompetent while positioning himself as the solution to problems he created." Isabella sank into her chair, one hand pressed to her belly. Her child moved restlessly, as if sensing her distress. "How did I not see this? How was I so blind?" "Because you trusted him," James said gently. "Because you believed that someone you loved could never hurt you this way. That's not blindness, Isabella. That's humanity." A sudden sound in the corridor made them all freeze, footsteps coming their way. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as the footsteps stopped just outside her office door. The handle turned slowly, and light from the hallway spilled into the room. "Well, well, working late, darling." David Morrison stood silhouetted in the doorway, his tall frame blocking most of the light. Even in the dimness, Isabella could see his perfect smile, the one that had once made her heart race and now made her stomach turn. He was impeccably dressed, despite the early hour, his dark hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit wrinkle-free. Everything about him screamed success and control. "David." Isabella's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I could ask you the same question." He stepped into the room, his eyes taking in James and Marcus with calculated interest. "James Rodriguez, I should have expected you'd call in the cavalry. And you must be—" His gaze settled on Marcus. "Marcus Chen, forensic accountant," Marcus replied evenly, not bothering to hide what he was doing. David's smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. "Forensic accountant. How dramatic. Isabella, sweetheart, what exactly do you think you're accomplishing here?" "Uncovering the truth," Isabella said, standing up slowly. She was surprised to find that facing him wasn't as terrifying as she'd expected. The evidence they'd gathered had given her something she'd lost in that conference room: certainty. "The truth." David laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The truth is that you've been having an emotional breakdown for months. The stress of pregnancy, the demands of running a company you're no longer qualified to manage, it's all been too much for you." "Is that the story you're planning to tell the board?" James asked mildly. David turned his attention to the lawyer. "I'm planning to tell them what they already know, that Isabella has become unreliable, emotional, and frankly dangerous to the company's future. Her pregnancy has affected her judgment, and recent decisions have cost us significant revenue." "What recent decisions?" Isabella demanded. "The European expansion you've been pushing. The R&D investments that have yielded no returns. The employee benefits package that's bleeding us dry." David's voice took on a patronizing tone that made Isabella's skin crawl. "All decisions made against board recommendations, all financially irresponsible." "Those are lies, and you know it," Isabella said, her voice rising. "Are they—" David pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what looked like emails. "Because I have documentation showing that your expansion plans were rejected by the board, your R&D investments were questioned by our accountants, and your benefits package was flagged as unsustainable by our CFO." Isabella stared at him, understanding dawning, like a cold sunrise. "You've been rewriting history, creating false documentation." "I've been documenting reality," David said smoothly. "The reality that you're no longer fit to run this company. The reality that the board has lost confidence in your leadership. The reality that Meridian Technologies needs new management if it's going to survive." "Management like you?" Marcus asked. David's smile became predatory. "I've been here from the beginning. I understand this company's needs, its potential, its weaknesses. I have the board's trust and the employees' respect. Unlike some people, I'm not letting personal problems interfere with business decisions." "Personal problems like embezzling $800,000, Isabella asked quietly. For the first time, David's composure cracked slightly. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, systematic withdrawals over 14 months, financial records that show exactly where every stolen dollar went." Isabella stepped closer to him, and despite her pregnancy, despite her exhaustion, she felt powerful. "We have everything, David. Every transaction, every transfer, every lie you told to cover your tracks." David's eyes darted to Marcus's laptop, then back to Isabella. "Even if any of that were true, which it isn't, it would be your word against mine. And frankly, who do you think the board is going to believe? The stable, competent partner who's been holding this company together, or the pregnant woman who's been having emotional breakdowns and making increasingly erratic decisions? They're going to believe the evidence," James said, closing his briefcase with a sharp snap. which we now have plenty of. Evidence that can be explained away, David said. Evidence that can be discredited when it comes from someone who's clearly unstable. Isabella felt something shift inside her, a coldness that started in her chest and spread outward. You really think you're going to get away with this? I know I am. Because tomorrow morning when the board votes you out, I'll be there to pick up the pieces. To save the company you've destroyed with your incompetence and your hormones. David's mask slipped completely, then revealing the calculated cruelty beneath. And our child will grow up knowing that their father saved what their mother nearly ruined. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and Isabella felt something break inside her, not her spirit, but her last connection to the man she thought she'd loved. This wasn't the father she wanted for her child. This wasn't the man she'd built a company with. This was a stranger wearing David's face, speaking words that felt like poison. Get out, she said quietly. I'm sorry. Get out of my office. Get out of my building. Get out of my life. Isabella's voice grew stronger with each word. You want a war, you've got one. But don't for 1 second think that I'm going to roll over and let you steal everything I've built. David's laugh was cold and sharp. Everything you've built, sweetheart, you couldn't have built a lemonade stand without my help. I was the one who secured our initial funding. I was the one who negotiated our major contracts. I was the one who made the deals that turned your little startup into something real. And I was the one who had the vision, the innovation, and the leadership to make it all work, Isabella shot back. You were a facilitator, David. A very good one, but ultimately replaceable. Replaceable. David's voice turned dangerous. We'll see who's replaceable when the board hears about your late-night adventures, your paranoid accusations, your increasing instability. They'll see that you're not fit to be a mother, let alone a CEO. The threat was clear, and Isabella felt fear spike through her anger. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then a third. Expecting someone? David asked mockingly. Isabella glanced at her phone and felt her heart skip. The messages were from her head of security, her assistant from the marketing department, and her lead developer, all saying variations of the same thing. Saw the news. Behind you 100%. What can we do to help? What news? Isabella asked, looking at James. James was staring at his own phone, his face pale. Isabella, you need to see this. He handed her his phone, which was displaying a local news website. The headline made her knees weak. Meridian Technologies, CEO embezzlement scandal insider reveals massive fraud. What the hell? Isabella scrolled through the article, her confusion growing with every line. According to the story, an anonymous whistleblower had revealed massive financial irregularities at Meridian Technologies, with evidence pointing to systematic embezzlement by someone in the executive leadership. I don't understand, Isabella said. We didn't release any of this information. David was reading over her shoulder, his face growing darker by the second. This is impossible. No one else knew about any of this. Apparently, someone did, Marcus said mildly, but there was something in his voice that made Isabella look at him sharply. Marcus, what did you do? The forensic accountant's expression was carefully neutral. I may have mentioned our findings to a journalist friend of mine, hypothetically speaking. You what? David exploded. Someone who might be interested in a story about corporate fraud and executive malfeasance, Marcus continued calmly. Someone who might want to investigate further if provided with the right kind of documentation. Isabella stared at him, torn between horror and admiration. You leaked our evidence to the press. I provided information about potential financial crimes to someone with a responsibility to investigate such matters, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. David was pacing now, his carefully controlled facade cracking completely. This is insane. You've destroyed any chance of handling this quietly, of protecting the company's reputation. I've protected the company from thieves, Marcus replied. There's a difference. Isabella's phone was buzzing constantly now with calls and texts from employees, board members, clients, and reporters. The story was spreading, and with it support she hadn't expected. Look at this, she said, showing James a text from Dr. Patricia Williams, the board member who'd been most skeptical of Isabella's leadership. She says she always had suspicions about the financial reports, but couldn't prove anything. She wants to meet before the board meeting. Another text, this one from their biggest client, standing behind Meridian and Isabella. Don't let the bastards win. And another from Tom Richardson, their head of development. The whole tech team is with you. We've suspected David was sabotaging projects for months. David's phone was ringing too, but the calls seemed to be having the opposite effect. Isabella watched his face grow ashen as he answered call after call, each conversation apparently worse than the last. This is a disaster, he muttered, after ending what sounded like a very unpleasant conversation with someone from the board. The company's stock is going to tank. Our reputation is ruined. Years of work down the drain. Your years of theft, you mean? Isabella said coldly. I was protecting this company. David shouted, his composure finally shattering completely. You think you could have built this without me? You think your precious vision would have meant anything without someone who understood how business really works? Business doesn't work by stealing from your partners, James said quietly. Steal, I earned every penny of that money. I was the one doing the real work while she played visionary. I was the one making the hard decisions while she worried about employee satisfaction and company culture. You deserved nothing, Isabella interrupted, her voice cutting through his protestations like a blade. You were a partner, not an owner. You were paid well for your contributions, and you chose to steal more. David's eyes were wild now, all pretense of control abandoned. You'll never prove it was me. The accounts are in shell company names. The documentation can be explained. You have nothing concrete. Actually, Marcus said, still typing on his laptop, we have quite a lot, including video surveillance from the bank where you opened the Cayman account. David went very still. What video surveillance? The kind that shows you personally signing the paperwork for the shell companies. The kind that timestamps your visits to coincide exactly with the major transfers. The kind that banks keep for exactly these situations. Isabella watched David's face cycle through disbelief, panic, and finally a kind of resigned fury. You're all going to regret this, he said quietly. When the dust settles and the company is in ruins, when the employees are out of jobs and the clients have fled, remember that this is what you chose. No, Isabella said, standing up and facing him fully. This is what you chose when you decided to betray everyone who trusted you. This is what you chose when you decided to steal from the company that gave you everything. This is what you chose when you decided to destroy me instead of building something together. She paused, one hand resting on her belly, feeling her child move restlessly inside her. And this is what I choose when I decide to fight back. David stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella saw something flicker across his face, recognition maybe, or regret. For just a second, she glimpsed the man she'd thought she'd fallen in love with, the partner she'd believed in. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. The board meeting is in 4 hours, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. We'll see which one of us they believe. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor until they faded into silence. Isabella sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was wearing off, leaving her feeling hollow and shaky. "Are you all right?" James asked, moving to her side. "I don't know," Isabella admitted. "Part of me still can't believe this is happening. Yesterday morning I was planning our wedding. Now I'm preparing to testify against him for embezzlement." "The man you fell in love with never existed," James said gently. "The man who just walked out of here, that's who David really is. You're not betraying your partner, Isabella. You're protecting your company from a criminal." Isabella's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it, expecting another supportive message from an employee or client. Instead, she saw Michael's name on the screen. "Saw the news," his text read. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Isabella stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the stranger who'd found her crying at a gas station, and somehow convinced her that she was stronger than she knew. Michael, who had his own battles to fight, his own son to worry about, but who'd taken time to care about her crisis. She typed back quickly. "In the middle of it all, thank you for believing in me." His response came immediately. "Still believing. You've got this." "Who's that?" James asked, noticing her slight smile. "Someone who reminded me that I don't have to face this alone," Isabella said, tucking her phone away. Marcus had packed up his equipment and was preparing to leave. "I've copied everything we need," he told them. "Financial records, email correspondence, transaction histories, enough evidence to bury David Morrison for the next decade." "What happens now?" Isabella asked. "Now we prepare for the board meeting," James said. "We present our evidence, tell our story, and let the board decide who they trust more, the CEO who built this company or the partner who tried to steal it." Isabella nodded, feeling some of her strength returning. Outside the windows, dawn was beginning to break over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In a few hours, she'd face the board that would decide her company's future and her own. But she wouldn't face it as the broken woman who'd sat crying at a gas station. She'd face it as Isabella Chen, CEO of Meridian Technologies, mother-to-be, and someone who refused to let thieves and liars win. The battle for her company was about to begin, and for the first time since this nightmare started, Isabella believed she might actually win. The boardroom at Meridian Technologies had never felt more like a courtroom than it did at 9:45 a.m. on that gray Thursday morning. Isabella sat at one end of the polished mahogany table, her hands folded carefully over the stack of evidence that would either save her company or destroy what remained of her life. The morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast long shadows across the room, and she couldn't help but think how fitting it was that this battle would be fought in the space where she'd celebrated so many victories. James Rodriguez sat to her right, his briefcase open and organized with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Marcus Chen had departed an hour earlier, but not before ensuring that every piece of financial evidence was documented, verified, and ready for presentation. The forensic accountant's parting words still echoed in Isabella's mind. "The numbers don't lie even when people do." Dr. Patricia Williams entered first, her silver hair pulled back in the same severe bun she'd worn to every board meeting for the past 3 years. As the head of the audit committee and Isabella's most vocal critic, Patricia's support would be crucial. She nodded curtly to Isabella before taking her seat, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Patricia," Isabella said quietly, "thank you for coming early. I've been reviewing the preliminary financial documents your lawyer sent over." Patricia replied, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years in corporate finance. If these numbers are accurate, we have a problem much larger than anyone suspected. Richard Blake, the venture capitalist who'd provided Meridian's initial funding, entered next, followed by Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Isabella, despite sharing a surname, a technology industry veteran, who served as the board's strategic advisor. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension and unasked questions. "Where's David?" Richard asked, checking his expensive watch. He called an emergency session for 10 o'clock, and now he's late to his own meeting. David Morrison is no longer affiliated with Meridian Technologies. Isabella said, her voice carrying an authority she didn't entirely feel. As of this morning, his partnership agreement has been terminated for cause. The words sent a ripple of shock through the room. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her dark eyes sharp with interest. "That's a significant decision to make unilaterally, Isabella. What cause?" Before Isabella could answer, the boardroom doors burst open and David strode in, followed by his own lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit whom Isabella recognized as Martin Kellerman, one of the city's most ruthless corporate attorneys. David looked haggard despite his perfect grooming, and Isabella could see the strain of the morning's revelations in the tight lines around his eyes. "Sorry I'm late," David said, his voice carrying its usual charm despite the circumstances. "I was dealing with some rather serious accusations that have been made against me." He took his seat across from Isabella, and for a moment, they stared at each other across the table like generals before a battle. Martin Kellerman sat beside him, already pulling documents from his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Before we begin," David continued, "I want to address the elephant in the room. I'm sure you've all seen the news reports this morning, the wild accusations being thrown around by certain parties who seem intent on destroying this company rather than facing their own failures." Isabella felt her jaw clench, but James placed a restraining hand on her arm. They'd discussed strategy extensively during the pre-dawn hours, and jumping to emotional responses would only play into David's narrative. Patricia Williams cleared her throat. "David, we've received some very detailed financial documentation that raises serious questions about fund management over the past 14 months. Before we discuss anything else, I think we need to address these concerns." David's smile never wavered, but Isabella saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped his pen. "I'm happy to address any questions about our financial management. But first, I think we need to discuss the real issue facing this company, Isabella's increasing instability and inability to make rational decisions." "That's enough," Dr. Chen interjected sharply. "We're not here to engage in personal attacks. We're here to review facts and make decisions based on evidence." Martin Kellerman leaned forward. "With respect, Dr. Chen, the evidence we need to consider includes Ms. Isabella's recent behavior, her emotional volatility, and her increasingly erratic decision-making process. These are not personal attacks, they're legitimate concerns about leadership competency." Isabella felt her chest tighten with anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Mr. Kellerman, I believe you're here as an observer only. Mr. Morrison is no longer a partner in this company, which means his legal representation has no standing in this meeting." "Actually," David said smoothly, "I believe you'll find that my partnership agreement includes specific provisions about termination procedures. You can't simply declare our partnership void without following proper legal channels and board approval." James Rodriguez finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Mr. Morrison, your partnership agreement also includes specific clauses about fiduciary responsibility and fraudulent activity. When a partner engages in systematic embezzlement, those termination procedures are automatically triggered." The word embezzlement hung in the air like a thunderclap. Richard Blake sat back in his chair, his face pale. "That's a very serious accusation, James. It's a very serious crime, James replied, which is why we have very serious evidence to support the accusation. David laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Evidence manufactured by a disgruntled CEO who can't accept that her leadership has failed. Isabella's been looking for someone to blame for months, and now she's found her scapegoat. The evidence speaks for itself, Isabella said, finally finding her voice. James, if you would present the financial analysis. For the next 45 minutes, James methodically laid out the case against David Morrison. Bank records showing systematic withdrawals from company accounts. Shell company documentation linking directly to David's personal identification. Email chains revealing coordination with Sarah Martinez, Isabella's former assistant, to manipulate financial reports and board communications. Patricia Williams studied each document with the intensity of a detective examining crime scene evidence. These Cayman Islands transfers, she said finally. The amounts and timing correspond exactly with discrepancies I've been noticing in our quarterly reports. Discrepancies that David himself brought to your attention, James pointed out. Creating problems and then positioning himself as the person best equipped to solve them. Richard Blake was examining a series of bank statements, his venture capitalist's eye for financial irregularities evident in his focused concentration. This is sophisticated work, he admitted grudgingly. Someone with intimate knowledge of our systems and access to our accounts. Someone trusted with partnership-level authority, Dr. Chen added pointedly. David had remained silent during the presentation, but now he leaned forward with the confidence of a man playing his trump card. Assuming any of this documentation is legitimate, which I dispute, you're still missing the fundamental question of motive. Why would I steal from a company I helped build, a company that was already making me wealthy? Because wealthy wasn't enough, Isabella said quietly. Because you wanted control. Because you decided that the company I built with my vision and my work should belong to you instead. Your vision. David's mask of composure finally cracked. Your vision was to create a feel-good tech startup that prioritized employee happiness over profit margins. I was the one who turned your little dream into a real business. The admission hung in the air, and Isabella saw several board members exchange meaningful glances. David's lawyer was making frantic notes, probably recognizing that his client had just undermined their entire defense strategy. So you admit that you viewed yourself as the real power behind the company, Dr. Chen said slowly. That you believed Isabella's leadership was inadequate. I'm saying that building a successful business requires making hard decisions that Isabella wasn't willing to make. David replied, trying to recover his composure. Someone had to be the adult in the room. Adults don't steal $800,000 from their partners, Patricia Williams said dryly. Martin Kellerman finally intervened. My client disputes those financial allegations entirely. But even if irregularities occurred, there's no evidence linking them specifically to Mr. Morrison. These shell companies could have been established by anyone with access to company systems. Including Isabella herself, David added, and the accusation landed like a physical blow. The room went silent. Isabella felt her breath catch in her throat, as she realized what David was trying to do: turn the evidence against her, make her the prime suspect in her own investigation. That's absurd, James said immediately. Isabella is the one who discovered the embezzlement and reported it. After months of erratic behavior and questionable decisions, Martin Kellerman countered. After the stress of pregnancy began affecting her judgment, it's not unheard of for executives under pressure to create financial irregularities and then blame others when discovery becomes inevitable. Isabella felt the room spinning slightly, the weight of the accusation and the morning's stress combining with her pregnancy to make her feel lightheaded. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, she glanced down and saw Michael's name on the screen. "Remember, you didn't build this company by backing down from fights. Don't start now." The simple words steadied her more than any legal argument could have. She thought about the man who'd found her crying at a gas station, who'd believed in her strength when she'd forgotten it herself. She thought about her unborn child, who deserved to inherit a legacy of courage rather than capitulation. "Mr. Kellerman," Isabella said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "your client's accusation is not only false, it's desperate. The kind of desperate move someone makes when they realize their careful plans are falling apart." She stood up slowly, one hand resting on her belly, and addressed the board directly. "I built this company from nothing. I mortgaged my house to fund our first prototype. I worked 18-hour days for 3 years to establish our market position. I hired every employee personally, chose every client relationship carefully, and made every major strategic decision that brought us to where we are today." Her voice grew more passionate as she continued. "David Morrison was my partner, and I trusted him completely. I gave him access to our accounts authority over our financial planning and input into every major decision, and he used that trust to systematically steal from the company we built together." "Allegedly," Martin Kellerman interjected. "No," Isabella replied firmly. "Definitively. The evidence doesn't lie, Mr. Kellerman. Bank records don't lie. Video surveillance doesn't lie. The only person in this room who's lying is your client." David's composure finally shattered completely. "You self-righteous bitch," he snarled, all pretense of professionalism abandoned. "You think you're so pure, so perfect. But you're nothing without me. You're a mediocre entrepreneur who got lucky with one good idea and then rode other people's work to success." The personal attack shocked the room into silence, but Isabella felt something click into place, a cold, clear certainty that cut through all her doubts and fears. "There it is," she said quietly. "There's the man I discovered last night in our conference room. The man who thinks he deserves credit for other people's work. The man who believes that theft is justified when the victim is someone he considers inferior." She turned back to the board. "You want to know why David stole from this company? It's right there. He doesn't believe I deserve what I built. He doesn't believe that a woman, especially a pregnant woman, could possibly be competent enough to run a successful business. So he decided to take what he thought should be his." Patricia Williams was studying David with the sharp attention of someone seeing him clearly for the first time. "David, your response to these accusations has been illuminating." "My response has been honest," David replied, trying to regain his professional demeanor. "Isabella's accusations are the product of hormonal instability and professional paranoia. The stress of pregnancy has clearly affected her judgment." "Enough," Dr. Chen said sharply. "I've heard enough sexist dismissals for one morning. David, your behavior in this meeting has been unprofessional and frankly disgusting." Richard Blake was reviewing the financial documents again, his face grim. "Isabella, assuming we accept the validity of this evidence, what's your proposal for moving forward?" Isabella felt her heart racing, knowing that her next words would determine not just her future, but the future of every employee who'd trusted her to build something worthwhile. "David Morrison is terminated as a partner effective immediately," she said. "His access to all company systems is revoked, his authority over financial matters is eliminated, and criminal charges will be filed for embezzlement and fraud." "And the company itself?" Patricia asked. "How do we recover from this kind of financial and reputational damage?" "We do what we've always done," Isabella replied. We innovate. We work harder than our competitors. We prove that integrity and vision can triumph over greed and deception. She paused, looking around the table at the faces of people who would decide her fate. But I can't do it alone. I need your support, your expertise, and your continued belief in what we're building here. Martin Kellerman was whispering urgently in David's ear, but David pushed him away. This isn't over, Isabella. You think you've won, but destroying me won't save this company. Without my contacts, my deals, my business relationships, Meridian will collapse within 6 months. We'll see, Isabella replied calmly. Patricia Williams called for a formal vote on David's termination and the board's confidence in Isabella's continued leadership. The process took 15 minutes, with each member explaining their decision in careful detail. When the final vote was tallied 4-0 in favor of termination and continued confidence, Isabella felt her knees go weak with relief. David Morrison was no longer her partner, no longer her problem, no longer a threat to the company she'd built with her own vision and determination. As David and his lawyer gathered their materials and prepared to leave, he stopped beside Isabella's chair. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly, his voice filled with the kind of cold fury that makes smart people afraid. "I know exactly what I've done," Isabella replied without looking up. "I've protected my company from a thief." David left without another word, and the boardroom fell silent except for the soft whisper of papers being shuffled and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. "Well," Patricia Williams said, finally removing her glasses and cleaning them with methodical precision. "That was unpleasant, but necessary." Richard Blake was already on his phone, presumably calling contacts to begin damage control for the company's reputation. Chen was reviewing the financial evidence one more time, her expression thoughtful. "Isabella," she said finally, "this is going to be a difficult transition period. David wasn't entirely wrong about his business relationships and industry contacts. Losing those connections will create challenges." "I know," Isabella admitted. "But I'd rather build new relationships based on honest dealing than maintain old ones built on lies." James Rodriguez was packing up his briefcase, but he paused to address the board. "There will likely be criminal proceedings against Mr. Morrison. Isabella may be called to testify, and the company may face additional scrutiny from regulatory agencies." "We'll handle whatever comes," Isabella said. "We've survived worse challenges." As the board members filed out of the room, Isabella remained seated at the table, one hand pressed to her belly, where her child was moving restlessly. The battle was won, but she knew the war was far from over. Rebuilding the company's reputation, replacing David's business connections, maintaining employee morale and client confidence, all of that lay ahead. Her phone buzzed again, and she saw another message from Michael. "Saw the news update. Board voted in your favor. Proud of you for fighting back." Isabella smiled for the first time in what felt like weeks. She typed back, "Couldn't have done it without someone reminding me that I was stronger than I thought." "What's next?" His reply came quickly. Isabella looked around the empty boardroom at the space where she'd just won the most important battle of her professional life. What was next? Rebuilding, growing, proving that integrity and vision could create something lasting and meaningful. "Now I get back to work," she typed. "Now I build something worth inheriting." As she gathered her papers and prepared to leave the boardroom, Isabella felt her child kick strongly against her ribs as if in approval. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as herself, not as David's partner, not as someone's victim, but as Isabella Chen, CEO of Meridian Technologies, and a woman who refused to let thieves and liars define her story. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare started, Isabella was looking forward to it. 3 months had passed since the boardroom confrontation that changed everything, and Isabella stood in her corner office watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across the city skyline. Her reflection in the window showed the changes those months had wrought. Her pregnancy was now unmistakably visible. Her face had regained some of its color, and there was a strength in her posture that hadn't been there during those dark days when David's betrayal had nearly destroyed her. The company was thriving in ways she'd never expected. The scandal that should have killed Meridian Technologies had instead become a rallying cry for employees and clients who respected integrity over convenience. Orders were up 30%. 3 major corporations had switched their contracts from competitors specifically to work with the company that did the right thing. And Isabella's inbox was filled daily with resumes from top talent wanting to join what industry publications were calling the most ethical tech firm in the region. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts, and Tom Richardson, their head of development, poked his head inside. "Isabella, the new COO candidate is here for his interview." Isabella's heart gave an unexpected flutter. She'd been putting off filling the chief operations officer position for weeks, unable to shake the feeling that the right person hadn't applied yet. But this morning's candidate was different, not because of his impressive resume or stellar references, but because of the circumstances that had brought him to her attention. "Send him in," she said, smoothing her dress over her growing belly and returning to her desk. Michael Carter entered the office with the same quiet confidence she remembered from that night at the gas station, but now he was dressed in a crisp suit that somehow didn't diminish the authenticity that had drawn her to trust him when she'd needed it most. He looked around the office with genuine appreciation, taking in the awards on the walls, the photos of company achievements, the view of the city that spoke of success earned rather than inherited. "Ms. Chen," he said with a slight smile, extending his hand. "It's good to see you again." "Please call me Isabella," she replied, shaking his hand and noting that his grip was as steady and reassuring as she remembered. "And thank you for coming. I have to admit, when I saw your application, I was surprised." Michael took the seat across from her desk, and Isabella noticed that he looked directly at her when he spoke, not letting his eyes drift to her pregnancy or the obvious signs of wealth around them. "I was surprised to be applying," he admitted. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be interviewing for a C-suite position at a major tech company, I'd have laughed. "What changed?" Michael was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "A lot of things. My son's surgery went better than well, actually. The doctors say he'll be able to play baseball again next spring." His face lit up when he mentioned Ethan, and Isabella felt a warmth in her chest at the obvious love there. "That's wonderful news," she said sincerely. "I remember you mentioning how much he loves the game." "He does, but more than that, watching him fight through everything, the surgery, the recovery, the uncertainty, it made me realize I'd been settling for less than what I was capable of. I'd gotten so focused on just surviving that I'd forgotten I could actually build something meaningful." Isabella leaned back in her chair, studying this man who'd appeared in her life at exactly the moment she'd needed someone to believe in her potential. "Tell me about your background. Your resume shows construction management and logistics coordination, but no traditional corporate experience." "That's true," Michael acknowledged. "But I think the skills transfer more than you might expect. Construction project management means coordinating dozens of moving parts, managing budgets down to the penny, ensuring quality control under tight deadlines, and motivating teams of people who don't necessarily want to be there." He paused, then continued with growing confidence. "Logistics coordination taught me how to solve problems creatively when conventional solutions aren't available. When you're working with limited resources, you learn to maximize efficiency in ways that people with unlimited budgets never have to consider. Isabella found herself leaning forward, engaged, despite her initial reservations. Give me an example. Last year, we had a project where the primary supplier went bankrupt halfway through construction, leaving us with half the materials we needed and no clear way to source the rest within budget. I spent 3 days calling every supplier within a 500-mile radius, negotiating package deals and arranging transportation sharing with 2 other construction companies to make the numbers work. Michael's voice gained momentum as he spoke. We not only completed the project on time and under budget, but the alternative suppliers we found ended up providing higher quality materials than the original vendor. The client was so impressed, they gave us 3 additional contracts. Resourcefulness under pressure, Isabella mused. That's definitely a valuable skill in tech. It's a valuable skill anywhere, Michael replied. But what struck me about your company even before I knew you personally was that you seem to value solving problems the right way, not just the expedient way. Isabella felt a familiar flutter of pride at the recognition. Meridian Technologies had built its reputation on ethical practices and innovative solutions, values, that had nearly been destroyed by David's betrayal, but had ultimately emerged stronger. Speaking of doing things the right way, she said carefully, I have to address the obvious question. This position came open because my former business partner was embezzling from the company. Given that history, I need someone I can trust completely. Someone whose integrity is beyond question. Michael met her gaze steadily. Isabella, the night we met, you were at the lowest point in your life. You could have been anyone, a homeless person, a drug addict, someone dangerous. But I stopped to help because it was the right thing to do, not because I thought I'd get something out of it. He paused, then continued more quietly. I don't know if that proves anything about my character, but I can tell you this. I've spent the last 8 years working multiple jobs to provide for my son, and I've never once been tempted to take shortcuts or compromise my values even when things were desperate. Why this job? Isabella asked. Why here? Why now? You could probably find operations positions at other companies, places where you wouldn't have to deal with the aftermath of a major scandal. Michael was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight of consideration. Because 3 months ago, I watched you refuse to give up when everyone expected you to. Because I've seen how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. Because your company is building something that matters, and I want to be part of that. He leaned forward slightly. But also because I think you need someone who understands what it's like to fight for something you believe in. Someone who won't fold under pressure or compromise your values for the sake of convenience. Isabella felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, pregnancy hormones amplifying emotions that were already running high. This man had seen her at her most vulnerable and had somehow weaponized strength she'd forgotten she possessed. Now he was asking to join her company not for personal gain, but because he believed in what she was building. Tell me about your vision for the COO role, she said, trying to keep her voice professional despite the emotional undercurrent. Honestly, I see it as the position that handles everything you don't have time for, so you can focus on the things only you can do, Michael replied. You're the visionary, the leader, the face of the company. But someone needs to handle the day-to-day operations, the logistics coordination, the problem-solving that keeps everything running smoothly. He gestured toward the window where the city sprawled beneath them. You've built something remarkable here, but growth brings complexity. More employees, more clients, more moving parts that need coordination. I want to be the person who makes sure all those pieces work together seamlessly. Isabella found herself nodding. This was exactly what she'd been looking for, without knowing it, not someone to replace David's grand gestures and strategic networking, but someone to handle the fundamental operations that kept a company functioning. "What about the financial aspects?" she asked. "The COO position involves significant budget authority and oversight of major expenditures." "I've been managing tight budgets my entire adult life," Michael said simply. "I know the difference between necessary expenses and wasteful spending. I also know the value of investing in quality people and systems, even when the short-term costs seem high." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Plus, after what happened with David, I imagine you'll be implementing pretty robust oversight systems anyway." Isabella couldn't help but laugh. "That's putting it mildly. Our new financial controls would make the Pentagon jealous." They spent the next hour discussing operational challenges, growth strategies, and the cultural values that Isabella wanted to maintain as the company expanded. Michael asked thoughtful questions about employee development, client relations, and long-term planning that demonstrated both practical wisdom and genuine engagement with the company's mission. "I have to ask," Isabella said finally, "what about your son? This position would require significant travel and long hours, especially during our international expansion phase." Michael's expression grew serious. "Ethan is my priority always, but he's also 8 years old and remarkably resilient. More than that, he's proud of the work I do. He wants to see his father build something meaningful, not just survive from paycheck to paycheck." He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. "I think there's value in showing him that sometimes you have to take risks to create the life you want. That playing it safe isn't always the safest option in the long run." Isabella felt her chest tighten with recognition. This was exactly the lesson she wanted to teach her own unborn child, that integrity and courage could create opportunities that compromise and fear never could. "When could you start?" she asked the question, slipping out before she'd consciously decided to make an offer. Michael's eyes widened slightly. "Are you offering me the position?" "I'm offering you the position," Isabella confirmed, feeling a certainty that surprised her with its strength. "The salary is commensurate with industry standards for COO roles, plus equity participation and full benefits, including health insurance for you and Ethan." She pulled a folder from her desk drawer and slid it across to him. "These are the details. Look them over, think about it. Discuss it with your son if you need to. But I hope you'll say yes." Michael opened the folder and scanned the offer letter, his eyes widening as he took in the numbers. Isabella knew the salary was more than generous enough to change his life completely, to give Ethan opportunities that had seemed impossible just months ago. "Isabella," Michael said quietly, "this is incredibly generous, more than generous." "It's what the position is worth," she replied firmly, "and it's what someone with your integrity and capabilities deserves." Michael closed the folder and looked directly at her. "I accept." The simple words sent a rush of relief and excitement through Isabella. She extended her hand across the desk, and when Michael shook it, she felt like she was sealing more than just an employment agreement. She was bringing someone into her company who understood what it meant to fight for something worth protecting. "Welcome to Meridian Technologies," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Thank you," Michael replied, and Isabella could see emotion flickering in his eyes. "You have no idea what this means to me and Ethan." "Actually, I think I do," Isabella said softly. "I know what it's like to need someone to believe in your potential." Over the following weeks, Michael's integration into the company exceeded every expectation Isabella had dared to hold. He approached each challenge with the methodical, problem-solving skills he'd developed in construction, and the creative resourcefulness that came from years of making impossible budgets work. His first major test came when their largest client, Peterson Industries, threatened to cancel a multi-million-dollar contract after a competitor offered similar services at 30% below Meridian's pricing. The account represented nearly 15% of their annual revenue, and losing it would force layoffs and project cancellations. Isabella was in her office reviewing the contract details when Michael knocked on her door, his expression calm despite the crisis they were facing. "I think I have a solution for the Peterson situation," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I'm listening," Isabella replied, grateful for any alternative to the price war that would destroy their profit margins. Instead of trying to match their pricing, "What if we offered something they can't?" Michael suggested. "I've been reviewing Peterson's operations, and they're facing significant supply chain challenges that are costing them more than they'd save by switching providers." Isabella leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of supply chain challenges?" "Coordination issues between their three main facilities, inventory management problems that are causing production delays, and quality control inconsistencies that are affecting their client relationships," Michael explained. "All problems that our technology solutions could address, but not if we're just providing basic services at cut-rate prices." He pulled out a detailed proposal he'd apparently been working on for days. "What if we offer them an integrated operations management package, not just our standard tech services, but a complete overhaul of their systems that addresses their underlying problems? The value proposition would be so much higher than simple cost savings that price becomes irrelevant." Isabella reviewed the proposal, impressed by its thoroughness and strategic thinking. "This would require significant additional development work on our part." "It would," Michael agreed. "But it would also create a much deeper relationship with Peterson, make us essentially irreplaceable to their operations, and generate ongoing revenue streams that would more than compensate for the initial investment." "What about the timeline? They want a response by Friday." Michael smiled. "I've already been in touch with Tom Richardson about the technical requirements. We can have a working prototype ready for demonstration by Thursday morning." Isabella stared at him, amazed by his initiative and foresight. "You've been planning this for how long?" "Since the day you told me about the Peterson situation," Michael replied. "I figured it was better to have a solution ready than to wait for the problem to become a crisis." The Peterson presentation was a triumph that exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only did they retain the contract, but Peterson signed an expanded agreement that increased their annual revenue by 40%. More importantly, the innovative approach caught the attention of other major clients who wanted similar comprehensive solutions. "You've essentially created a new revenue stream," Isabella told Michael as they walked back to the office after the successful presentation. "This integrated approach could reshape how we serve all our major clients." "It's just applied problem solving," Michael replied modestly. "Looking at what people actually need instead of just what they think they want." As autumn turned to winter, Michael's impact on the company became increasingly evident. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs as he implemented systems that reduced bureaucracy and improved communication between departments. Client retention rates improved dramatically as his personal approach to relationship management created deeper, more sustainable partnerships. But perhaps most importantly, Isabella found herself able to focus on the strategic vision and innovative development that had always been her greatest strengths. With Michael handling the operational complexities, she could spend time on the creative challenges that energized her, rather than the administrative tasks that drained her energy. Their working relationship evolved into something that felt like the partnership she'd thought she had with David, but built on mutual respect and shared values rather than convenience and attraction. Michael challenged her ideas when necessary, supported her decisions consistently, and brought a practical wisdom to complement her visionary thinking. One evening in late November, Isabella was working late when Michael knocked on her office door. She'd been putting in longer hours despite her advancing pregnancy, driven by the excitement of the company's growth and the approaching launch of their European expansion. "You know, your doctor said you should be cutting back on the late nights?" Michael said, settling into his usual chair. "Dr. Martinez says a lot of things," Isabella replied, not looking up from the financial projections she was reviewing. "I'm fine." "Isabella." Michael's voice carried a gentle firmness that made her look up. "When's the last time you went home before 8 o'clock?" She opened her mouth to answer, then realized she couldn't remember. "The company is at a crucial growth phase. There's too much to do." "The company will survive if you take care of yourself," Michael said. "But it won't survive if you work yourself into early labor or compromise your health trying to do everything personally." Isabella felt a flicker of irritation. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own schedule." "I know you are," Michael replied calmly. "But I also know what it's like to sacrifice everything for work and miss the things that really matter. Ethan's childhood went by so fast while I was working multiple jobs. I don't want you to miss your pregnancy because you're too busy building a company for your child." The words hit Isabella with unexpected force. She'd been so focused on creating a legacy for her unborn child that she'd forgotten to actually experience the pregnancy itself. When had she last taken time to just sit and feel the baby move? When had she last thought about nursery colors or baby names instead of quarterly projections and market expansion? "You're right," she admitted quietly. "I've been so determined to prove that David's betrayal didn't weaken the company that I've been pushing myself too hard." "The company is stronger than it's ever been," Michael said gently. "You've proven everything you needed to prove. Now maybe it's time to let other people help carry the load." Isabella looked at this man who'd become so much more than an employee, someone who somehow knew exactly when she needed support and when she needed challenge. "Thank you," she said simply, "for watching out for me." "It's what partners do," Michael replied, and something in the way he said the word partners made Isabella's heart skip slightly. Over the following weeks, Isabella began to delegate more responsibilities and trust the systems Michael had put in place. To her surprise, the company didn't collapse without her constant oversight. It continued to thrive with employees taking greater ownership of their work and clients, expressing even higher satisfaction with their service. The European expansion launched successfully in early December, with offices in London and Amsterdam that were profitable within their first month of operation. Industry publications were calling Meridian Technologies a case study in ethical business practices and sustainable growth. And Isabella's speaking engagements at conferences were booked solid through the following year. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, Patricia Williams called Isabella's office to schedule a private meeting. "I wanted to discuss the board's compensation review," Patricia said when she arrived the next day. "Specifically, the question of equity distribution and long-term incentives." Isabella felt a familiar tension. Board meetings still made her nervous, even though she had complete confidence in her leadership team and company direction. "What did you have in mind?" Isabella asked. "Michael Carter," Patricia said simply. "In 6 months, he's transformed this company's operational efficiency and created revenue opportunities we never imagined. The board feels strongly that his compensation should reflect his contribution to our success." Isabella was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "What are you suggesting?" "Partnership track," Patricia replied. "Not immediately, but with clear milestones and equity participation that could lead to junior partner status within 2 years. He's earned it, and frankly, we can't afford to lose him to a competitor who might offer better opportunities. Isabella found herself smiling at the recognition of Michael's value. I agree completely. He's been instrumental in our growth. There's something else. Patricia continued, her expression growing more serious. The board has been discussing succession planning, particularly given your pregnancy and the possibility that you might want to scale back your involvement at some point. Isabella felt her defensive instincts flare. I have no intention of scaling back my leadership role. No one is suggesting you should, Patricia said quickly. But good governance requires planning for various scenarios. If something happened to you, or if you decided to take extended family leave, we need to ensure continuity of leadership. And you think Michael should be part of that planning? I think Michael has demonstrated the kind of leadership qualities and company loyalty that make him an ideal succession candidate, Patricia replied. Not to replace you, but to serve as interim leadership if circumstances required it. Isabella considered this unexpected development. 6 months ago, she'd been fighting for her professional survival against a partner who'd tried to destroy everything she'd built. Now the board was suggesting that a man she'd met crying at a gas station should be positioned as her potential successor. What does Michael think about all this? Isabella asked. We haven't discussed it with him yet, Patricia admitted. We wanted your input first. This is your company, Isabella. We value your judgment about leadership development. That evening, Isabella found herself in the unusual position of having left the office at a reasonable hour. She was at home sitting in the nursery she'd finally begun preparing when her phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said when she answered. Not at all. What's on your mind? I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity you've given me, and to let you know that Ethan wants to invite you to his school's winter concert next week. He's been talking about his dad's boss so much that his teacher asked if you might want to attend. Isabella felt warmth spread through her chest. I'd love to come. What day? Thursday evening at 7. Fair warning, it's elementary school music, so the quality is more about enthusiasm than technical skill. Sounds perfect, Isabella replied, meaning it completely. After they hung up, Isabella sat in the quiet nursery, one hand resting on her growing belly. Her child was moving actively, as if responding to her peaceful mood. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about quarterly projections or market strategies or competitive positioning. Instead, she was thinking about the unexpected ways life could surprise you, about the stranger who'd become a trusted partner, about the company that had emerged stronger from betrayal than it had ever been before, about the child who would grow up knowing that integrity and courage could create opportunities that seemed impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to build something meaningful. But tonight, Isabella Chen was simply grateful for the journey that had brought her to this moment, pregnant, successful, surrounded by people who valued her, not for what she could give them, but for who she was. The man who'd found her crying at a gas station had become the partner she'd never known she needed. And somehow, that felt like the most natural thing in the world. 2 years later, Isabella stood in the same corner office where she'd once faced David Morrison's betrayal, but everything about the moment was different. The late afternoon sun streamed through windows that now overlooked a city where Meridian Technologies had become synonymous with ethical innovation and sustainable growth. The company had tripled in size, opened offices in 6 countries, and been featured on the cover of 3 major business magazines as the company that proved integrity pays. But none of those achievements mattered as much as the 18-month-old girl playing quietly in the corner of the office building towers with colorful blocks while her mother worked. Sophia Chen Carter had her mother's dark eyes and her father's steady temperament, and she'd already become the unofficial mascot of Meridian Technologies' charming employees and clients alike during her regular visits to the office. The sound of familiar footsteps in the hallway made Isabella look up from the acquisition proposal she'd been reviewing. Michael appeared in the doorway, his jacket slung over his shoulder, and his tie loosened after what she knew had been a challenging day of meetings with European partners. "How did the Amsterdam call go?" she asked, noting the slight tension around his eyes. "Better than expected," Michael replied, settling into the chair that had become his usual spot during their end-of-day meetings. "They're ready to move forward with the expansion, but they want guarantees about our commitment to their sustainability standards." "Which we can provide," Isabella said confidently. "Our environmental compliance record speaks for itself." "Daddy," Sophia abandoned her blocks and toddled toward Michael with the kind of pure joy that never failed to melt his heart. He scooped her up, and she immediately began chattering in the mixture of real words and baby babble that had become her signature communication style. Isabella watched them together with a warmth that still surprised her sometimes. The relationship between Michael and Sophia had developed naturally over the past year, beginning with Michael's gentle patience during Isabella's maternity leave, and evolving into the kind of bond that transcended biological connection. Sophia called him Daddy Mike to distinguish him from Daddy David in the few photos Isabella kept for historical accuracy. But there was no question about which man had earned the title through daily presence and unconditional love. "Any word from Ethan about the baseball tryouts?" Isabella asked, settling back in her chair with the contentment that came from watching her family, because that's what they'd become even though the legal formalities remained unaddressed. "Coach called this afternoon," Michael said, his face lighting up with pride. "Starting pitcher for the varsity team. Full scholarship offers from 3 colleges already, and he's only a sophomore." "That's incredible," Isabella breathed. "All those years of dreaming about playing baseball, and now look at him." Michael's expression grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I think about that night at the gas station, about how different everything could have been if I'd just minded my own business and driven past." "But you didn't," Isabella said quietly. "You stopped. You listened. You believed in someone you'd never met before." "I believed in someone who reminded me that courage isn't about not being afraid," Michael replied. "It's about doing the right thing even when you're terrified." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the office door. James Rodriguez peered inside, his expression mixing professional urgency with personal warmth. "Sorry to interrupt," James said, "but I wanted to give you both an update on the Morrison situation." Isabella felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied mentions of her former partner. David's criminal trial had concluded 6 months earlier with guilty verdicts on 8 counts of embezzlement and fraud, resulting in a 7-year prison sentence and full restitution to Meridian Technologies. But the legal proceedings had been emotionally draining for everyone involved. "What kind of update?" Michael asked instinctively, moving closer to Isabella's chair with Sophia still in his arms. "He's requesting a meeting," James said carefully. "Through his attorney. Says he wants to apologize and make additional amends." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected development. She'd spent months in therapy working through the betrayal and anger, gradually reaching a place of peace that didn't require David's acknowledgement or apology. The idea of reopening that emotional wound felt exhausting. "What do you think?" she asked Michael, trusting his judgment about people and situations in ways that had become second nature. "I think you don't owe him anything," Michael replied immediately. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not your emotional energy. If meeting with him would give you closure, that's one thing. But if you're doing it because you feel obligated to give him a chance to ease his guilt, that's something else entirely. Isabella nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in his words. James, please tell his attorney that I'm not interested in a meeting. David made his choices, and now he needs to live with the consequences. I've moved on, and I don't need his apology to validate that decision. I'll pass along the message, James said with obvious approval. There's one other thing. The prosecutor's office called. They want to know if you'd be willing to speak at a white-collar crime conference next month. Share your experience about corporate fraud prevention. That I'll consider, Isabella said. If it helps other business owners avoid what we went through, it might be worthwhile. After James left, Isabella and Michael sat in comfortable silence watching Sophia attempt to stack blocks taller than herself. The late afternoon light was fading, and the office was gradually emptying as employees headed home to their families. I've been thinking about something, Michael said finally. What's that partnership track? He said, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Patricia mentioned it again at the board meeting. Full partnership with equity participation and shared decision-making authority. Isabella felt her heart skip slightly. She'd been hoping Michael would bring up this conversation, but hadn't wanted to pressure him about such a significant decision. What are your thoughts? She asked carefully. I think it's an incredible opportunity, Michael replied. But I also think it changes things between us in ways that go beyond professional considerations. Isabella understood immediately what he meant. Over the past 2 years, their relationship had evolved from CEO and employee to something much more complex and meaningful. They shared decision-making responsibilities, collaborated on every major strategic initiative, and had developed a personal connection that transcended their professional roles. Adding formal partnership to that dynamic would require acknowledging feelings they'd both been careful to avoid addressing directly. It would change things, Isabella agreed quietly. The question is whether we're ready for those changes. Michael said, his eyes meeting hers with the honesty that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Before Isabella could respond, Sophia knocked over her tower of blocks and clapped her hands with delight at the destruction. The moment of levity broke some of the tension, but not the underlying significance of the conversation they were having. Can I tell you something? Isabella said, lifting Sophia into her lap and settling her with a board book. Always. 2 years ago, when David betrayed me, I thought I was finished. Not just professionally, but personally. I thought I'd lost the ability to trust my own judgment about people, about partnerships, about building something meaningful with another person. Isabella paused, stroking Sophia's hair, as their daughter turned the colorful pages. But watching you integrate into this company, seeing how you've handled every challenge and opportunity working alongside you on problems that seemed impossible, you've restored my faith in what partnership can be when it's built on the right foundation. Michael was quiet, but she could see the emotion in his expression. I want you as a partner, Isabella continued. Not just because you've earned it professionally, but because I can't imagine building the future of this company with anyone else. Isabella, Michael said softly, are we talking about business partnership or something more? The question hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of 2 years of careful friendship, professional collaboration, and unspoken feelings. Isabella looked at this man who'd found her at her lowest point, and somehow seen strength where she'd only felt defeat. She thought about the way he interacted with Sophia, the natural ease with which he'd stepped into the role of father figure. She considered the deep trust they'd built through countless shared decisions and mutual support. I'm talking about both, she said finally. I'm talking about partnership in every sense that matters. Michael stood up slowly and moved to the window, looking out at the city, where their company had become a symbol of ethical success. Isabella, you know how I feel about you. You know how much I love Sophia, how grateful I am for the life you've given us. But I need to be sure you're not confusing gratitude with something deeper. Michael. Isabella's voice carried a firmness that made him turn back to face her. Do you think I haven't thought about this? Do you think I haven't analyzed every aspect of our relationship, questioned my own motivations, worried about the complexity of mixing personal and professional decisions? She stood up, still holding Sophia, and moved closer to him. I've spent 2 years watching you handle pressure with grace, treat people with respect, make decisions based on values rather than convenience. I've seen you be a father to my daughter, not because you had to, but because you chose to. I've built a company alongside someone who challenges my ideas when necessary and supports my vision consistently. Isabella paused, looking directly into his eyes. This isn't gratitude, Michael. This is recognition. Recognition that some partnerships are worth the risk of complication. Michael reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And he kissed her, then soft and tentative at first, then with the passion of 2 years of restrained feelings, finally given permission to surface. Sophia giggled and clapped her hands, apparently approving of this new development in her parents' relationship. When they broke apart, Michael rested his forehead against Isabella's, both of them breathing slightly unsteadily. So, he said with a slight smile, business partners and life partners. If you'll have us, Isabella replied. Isabella Chen. I've been yours since the night you trusted a stranger to help you fight back against impossible odds. The following months brought changes that transformed not just their personal relationship, but the entire trajectory of Meridian Technologies. Michael's promotion to full partner was announced at the company's annual meeting, where employees and board members alike celebrated the elevation of someone who embodied the values that had made their organization successful. The legal partnership documents were signed on a Friday afternoon in April, with James Rodriguez officiating and Sophia providing entertainment by attempting to eat the ceremonial pen. But the real celebration happened that evening, when Michael proposed to Isabella in the same diner where they'd sat 2 years earlier, planning her fight against David's betrayal. I thought about proposing somewhere elegant, Michael said, sliding the ring across the worn Formica table. But this place represents something important, the moment when you decided to fight for what you believed in, instead of accepting defeat. Isabella looked at the simple but beautiful diamond ring, then at the man who'd somehow come everything she hadn't known she was looking for. Michael Carter, are you asking me to marry you in a 24-hour diner? I'm asking you to marry me in the place where you taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid, Michael replied. It's about doing the right thing even when the outcome is uncertain. Yes, Isabella said simply, letting him slide the ring onto her finger. Yes to marriage, yes to partnership, yes to building something meaningful together. The wedding took place 6 months later in the garden of Isabella's home, surrounded by employees who'd become family friends, who'd supported them through the darkest times, and board members who'd learned to respect the power of ethical leadership. Ethan served as best man, his recovery from heart surgery complete, and his baseball scholarship ensuring a bright future. Sophia was the flower girl, scattering petals with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. Dr. Patricia Williams, who'd become something of a mentor to Isabella, officiated the ceremony with the gravity and warmth that characterized everything she did. Marriage, like business partnership, requires trust, communication, and a shared commitment to something larger than individual interests. she told the assembled guests. Isabella and Michael have already proven they possess all these qualities. Today, they're simply making it official. As they exchanged vows, Isabella thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed her had instead led to discoveries about her own strength, about the possibility of building something meaningful with the right partner, about the difference between relationships based on convenience and those founded on genuine compatibility. 2 years ago, Isabella said during her vows, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered to me. But losing something built on false foundations gave me the opportunity to build something real. Michael, you didn't rescue me from my problems. You reminded me that I was strong enough to solve them myself. And then you chose to stand beside me as we built something neither of us could have created alone. Michael's vows were equally emotional. Isabella, you taught me that courage isn't just about protecting the people you love. It's about believing they're strong enough to overcome whatever challenges they face. You've given me a family I never thought I'd have, a career that matters, and a partnership that makes me better than I could be on my own. The reception was held at the company headquarters, transformed for the evening into a celebration space that represented everything Meridian Technologies had become. Employees from every level of the organization mingled with clients, board members, and family friends, creating the kind of community that ethical business practices could foster. During the father-daughter dance, Ethan asked Isabella to dance to represent the family they'd all chosen to create together. As they moved around the floor, he spoke quietly about the impact she'd had on his life. Before you hired my dad, I thought success meant just surviving. Whatever challenges came your way, Ethan said. But watching you two build this company together taught me that success means creating something that makes other people's lives better. Your father taught me that lesson long before I taught it to you, Isabella replied. He showed me that integrity isn't a luxury you can afford. When times are good, it's the foundation that carries you through when times are hard. As the evening wound down, Isabella and Michael found themselves alone on the balcony overlooking the city, where their company had become a symbol of what business could be when guided by values rather than just profit margins. Sophia was asleep in her stroller, exhausted from a day of being the center of attention. Any regrets? Michael asked, pulling Isabella close against the evening chill. Isabella considered the question seriously. Did she regret the pain of David's betrayal? The months of uncertainty and rebuilding? The complexity of mixing personal and professional relationships? No regrets, she said finally. Everything that happened led us here. Led us to each other, to this family, to the company we've built together. She paused, looking out at the city lights twinkling below them. But I do have one confession. What's that? Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That the stranger who stopped to help me at a gas station became my business partner, my husband, my children's father. Michael laughed softly. If someone had told me that night that helping a crying pregnant woman would lead to running a major corporation and marrying the most incredible woman I'd ever met, I'd have said they were crazy. What would you have done differently? Isabella asked. If you'd known how complicated everything would become. Michael was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Nothing, he said finally. Absolutely nothing. The best things in life are worth the complications they bring. 5 years later, Meridian Technologies had become an international success story, with offices in 12 countries and a reputation for innovation that attracted the best talent in the industry. Isabella and Michael's partnership had proven that ethical leadership and sustainable growth were not just compatible but mutually reinforcing. Their personal life had evolved as well. Sophia was now 6 years old and had been joined by twin boys, Marcus and James, named after the forensic accountant and lawyer who'd helped save the company during its darkest hour. Ethan had graduated from college with a degree in business administration and had chosen to join Meridian Technologies as a junior analyst, bringing fresh perspectives and youthful energy to the organization. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. During a conference on ethical business practices, Isabella was approached by a young entrepreneur who introduced herself as Sarah Martinez, the same assistant who'd helped David embezzle money from the company years earlier. "Ms. Chen," Sarah said nervously, "I don't know if you remember me, but I worked for your company several years ago. I was involved in some very poor decisions that hurt you and your employees." Isabella studied the young woman, noting the genuine remorse in her expression and the professional demeanor that suggested significant personal growth. "I remember," Isabella said carefully. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," Sarah said simply. "Not to ease my own guilt, but because you deserved better from people you trusted. What David and I did was wrong, and I've spent the past few years trying to understand how I let myself become someone who could betray trust like that." Isabella was quiet for a moment, recognizing the courage it had taken for Sarah to approach her at a public event. "I appreciate the apology," Isabella said finally. "What are you doing now?" "I'm starting my own consulting firm focused on helping small businesses develop ethical operational practices," Sarah replied. "I want to use what I learned from my mistakes to help other companies avoid the kind of toxic culture that led to my poor decisions." Isabella found herself impressed, despite her initial wariness. "That sounds like meaningful work." "I hoped you might think so," Sarah said, "because I was wondering if you might be willing to serve as a reference. Not for my character, I know I have to rebuild that trust over time, but for my technical skills and my understanding of operational challenges." The request surprised Isabella, but after a moment of consideration, she realized that redemption was possible for people who genuinely committed to change. "Send me your business plan," Isabella said. "If your approach is sound and your commitment is genuine, I'd be willing to provide a professional reference based on your abilities." "Thank you," Sarah said, tears forming in her eyes. "You don't know what this means to me." "I know what it means to get a second chance," Isabella replied. "Make the most of it." That evening, Isabella shared the encounter with Michael as they walked through the gardens of their home, watching their children play in the fading sunlight. "Do you think it was wise to offer her a reference?" Michael asked. "I think everyone deserves the opportunity to learn from their mistakes," Isabella replied. "Sarah made terrible choices, but she seems genuinely committed to building something positive from those experiences." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "You've always been generous with second chances." "You gave me a second chance," Isabella pointed out. "When I was sitting at that gas station convinced my life was over, you saw potential I'd forgotten I had." "That wasn't a second chance," Michael corrected gently. "That was recognition of strength that was already there." Isabella smiled, still amazed after all these years by his ability to see the best in every situation. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "Only every day," Michael replied, pulling her close. "But I never get tired of hearing it." As they stood together watching their children play, Isabella reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed her had instead led to discoveries about resilience, partnership, and the possibility of building something meaningful with the right person beside you. Meridian Technologies continued to grow and innovate, but its greatest success wasn't measured in revenue or market share. It was measured in the lives changed by ethical employment practices. The communities strengthened by responsible business decisions, and the example it provided that integrity and success were not just compatible but inseparable. The company that had emerged from the ashes of David Morrison's betrayal had become everything Isabella had dreamed of when she'd first mortgaged her house to fund a startup with a vision of better technology serving human needs. But more than that, it had become the foundation for a family and a life she'd never imagined possible during those dark hours when she'd thought she'd lost everything. Years later, when business school students studied Meridian Technologies as a case study in ethical leadership and crisis management, they would focus on the financial recovery, the operational innovations, and the strategic decisions that had transformed a near disaster into remarkable success. But Isabella knew the real story was simpler and more profound than any business analysis could capture. It was the story of a stranger who'd stopped to help someone in crisis, recognizing that sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as the worst disasters. It was the story of choosing to fight back when surrender seemed easier, of building trust, when betrayal had made cynicism attractive, of believing that integrity could create opportunities that compromise never could. It was the story of two people who'd found each other at their most vulnerable moments and chosen to build something together that was stronger than anything either could have created alone. It was the story of a love that had grown from mutual respect and shared values into something that could weather any storm and create beauty from the most challenging circumstances. And it was the story that Isabella and Michael would tell their children someday, when they were old enough to understand that the best things in life often come from the courage to help a stranger, the wisdom to recognize strength in unexpected places, and the faith to believe that endings can be transformed into beginnings when you're willing to fight for what matters most. In the end, the gas station where it all began had become just a memory, but the lesson it had taught them remained the foundation of everything they'd built together, that sometimes when you think you have nothing left to lose, that's exactly when you discover what you're truly capable of winning.